All right, good morning. It's May 22. This is the C4 Metro Subcommittee meeting, and Councilor Sherman and Commissioner Saps are your co-chairs. The meeting is yours.
Very good. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you here this morning. Trent, you always take away my introduction. I like to say the date and the time. It's the value I add in this world. So greetings. We've got a robust agenda today. I know that Commissioner Savas will be leading a little bit early, so we will jump right into it. So starting out with a JPACT update, we've got Jamie Lorenzini from the City of Happy Valley is going to provide us with the response that we received to the RFFA program direction questions. So Ms. Lorenzini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilor Sherman. Jamie Lorenzini, City of Happy Valley, and I also help sit on Team TPAC. Trent, would it be possible to bring Ted Labeled over? Fantastic. So by way of background, last month, C4 Metro Subcommittee received a presentation about REFA policy options from Ted Labeled and Grace Cho. During that discussion, there was a desire to submit questions. So Trent reached out to Team TPAC and we worked together to consolidate some of the questions we heard for follow-up with Metro staff. Those questions were submitted through Karen Bureg on April 26th. I've asked Ted to come over today because I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the response he graciously provided us. And I may tap him if there are additional questions. Trent, would it be all right if I shared my screen to show the questions we submitted?
Yes, you should be able to do that now.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, success. Okay. So in talking about it as a team, we identified several questions that C4 Metro Subcommittee raised, and we worked together to combine some of them together, figure out ways to rephrase it, and then add a little bit more of a technical clarification toward the bottom. Talking through some of these questions, the first one we raised was concern about the need for balance in the investments throughout the region in both step one, which is the bond repayment potential and regional programs, and step two, which is the competitive grants that are awarded to local projects. To inform the geographic balance, we asked Ted Labeled and his team to produce a geographic analysis of prior investments. Ted came back with a very impressive body of work, which is included a few pages later in your packets of the distribution of prior REFA awards, the bond distributions that have benefited different counties over time, and the anticipated bond repayments. In summarizing that body of information, it looks like Clackamas County has performed relatively well in the number of step two competitive grant awards that we've received. That is a numerical number of awards and doesn't necessarily relate to the dollar value or distribution of REFA dollars that has gone to Clackamas County. So I may need to go back and do a little bit more research on the actual distribution of money within each round. Though bear in mind that as we talk about the distribution of REFA dollars, Metro is prohibited by the federal government from sub-allocating REFA dollars to any particular geography. And so we can't say that Clackamas County is entitled to X percentage of dollars, but rather one would think that over time we would proportionately see some share of dollars coming to Clackamas County. Jumping over to step one, which is the regional bond and programs side of the equation. It looks like we've also performed relatively well. Clackamas County was a beneficiary of a bond project for the Portland-Milwaukee Transit valued at $99.9 million. So even though there may be fewer regional programs supporting Clackamas County, we benefited from a very high cost project. Are there any questions about that first element of our follow-up with Metro staff? If not, I'll move on.
Only one, Jamie. When do you think will you actually get the dollar amount versus the number of awards?
Yeah, so I hesitate to put this on Metro staff because I can research it through Metro's website, and that wasn't necessarily something we asked them for in our original communication. So after this meeting, I can go back, I can do some research and then circle back.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So our next question was, what could the region accomplish through a new step one bond? We asked them for some modeling of potential options, a list of prior bonds, the payoffs. I am going to scroll down so you can actually see it because it's very detailed. So Metro has a very long history with bonding a number of higher cost projects. We are looking at the 28 to 2030 RUFA cycle, and should be if we scroll down a little bit further. Boop. Okay. 28 to 30 RUFA cycle. And I want to draw your attention to this right-hand column here. As you can see, from the 2027 year to the 28 fiscal year, our bonding capacity is going to increase. Our anticipated bond payments are proportionally decreasing, even though the total value of some of these bond payments is going up, which is something we discussed previously. We have more capacity. Is there an appetite for a regional bond? Prior feedback from JPAC suggests that our regional partners are interested, which then becomes a question of how would the dollars be spent? So to that end, Metro staff has suggested that a regional bond could support a variety of different projects, a mix of projects, but my sense at this time is that we're not far enough along in that process to really define what that means. That being said, TPAC has been discussing different principles that could inform a bond, and I know that Ted will be discussing those options shortly after this presentation. As we discuss a bond, this payoff sheet might be helpful in framing how much are we paying currently and how could that change into the future. Are there any questions?
Jamie, question. I know that we've looked at how much the annual reduction in debt service, what that looks like, and I do remember in a different meeting talking about what that bonding capacity could be, given that. Do you have that number off the top of your head? What are we talking about from a bonding capacity perspective?
Great question. We've talked about a couple different scenarios, and I would tap Ted for that.
Okay. Very good. Actually, you know what? We'll put a pin on that one until we get into the into Ted's conversation.
Excellent.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, coming back up to the original email. How can RUFA investments best support near-term reductions in greenhouse gases throughout the region, such as Clackamas County? So we have a variety of different programs available through the RUFA process that can support different greenhouse gas reduction initiatives. Some of the ways we can do that is through the Metro Climate Smart strategy, which offers 5 strategies for how to invest in, or 9 strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Of that total, 5 strategies relate to how we invest transportation funding to make the biggest impact in emissions reductions. The most effective of those options is investment in transit. Some of the ways we can support greenhouse gas reductions through the RUFA process is on the step 1 side through things like transportation system management and transportation demand management. Some tools that have been available recently have been the Better Best program, which makes small-scale capital investments in transit operations like transit-only lanes, transit signal priority, rearranging how the stops work to make the system more efficient. And those are things that contribute to a higher functioning system. There are no questions. I'll hop down to our final question.
Jamie, actually, my concern overall, I'll just show my cards here a little bit of what I'm thinking. My concern is that because there is not much existence of transit infrastructure in Clackamas County compared to our other neighbors, and a lack of ability to have, available funds to operate anything had we have any expansion. There's the coverage, there's the frequency, I know that, I understand that argument. So I'm concerned and interested in what those other, you mentioned 9 greenhouse gas reduction strategies. And I know that there is some concern of mine, I've expressed this before, and some misinformation that's been out there for a long time. While we may not have the transit infrastructure to maybe have the biggest bang for the buck on greenhouse gas reduction, I think it really calls for flexibility in, the emissions that are produced as a result of congestion cars, stop, go, which is a big contributor as well. So there's tremendous amount of infrastructure opportunities, capital-wise, I think that we can invest in, whether you look at the 212 corridor or the 205 corridor, or frankly, even Sunnyside Road, for example, under congestion. So, but the 212 one's probably the biggest one that, where we have miles of backup on a road that needs transit infrastructure, but also needs, really the road being built. So maybe there's a way to marry that into the phase 2 of Sunrise in there. So my question is, what can you just give just a rough sketch of what those other 8s are of the 9?
I cannot, but I'll point to Ted. And I want to reflect back what I've heard. What I've heard is perhaps we need to take a more comprehensive look at how we quantify our GHG emissions to include things like emissions that are the product of congestion. I've also heard that the right-of-way facilities in Clackamas County might not be particularly well suited right now for transit, and how do we provide that tangible infrastructure going forward? And then third, how do we get more service in Clackamas County? Does that summarize your comments?
Yeah, and perhaps a fourth, that being, if we're going to bond, and we're trying to have that balance, we talked about that balance, and I imagine balance will be measured in whether it's infrastructure or dollars, whatnot, that flexibility in that, where are we most ripe for some investment? In what types of infrastructure improvements that can generate greenhouse gas reductions.
So taking a more flexible view of how dollars can be used to produce the outcomes that we're trying to see.
Yeah, if we're going to go out for bonding, right, and we're in step 1, can we have a long-term investment that helps create regional balance and lay the groundwork for future investments of all modes? For example, Highway 212 going out to Happy Valley, the main corridor, we're going to invest a lot going up from the 172nd corridor up into Multnomah County. But that road, that stretch in 205, doesn't even have the capacity for a pedestrian, let alone a bicycle, let alone a bus, let alone the cars and capacity today. So we need all of it.
Yes, it is also a high crash corridor. Mr. Leipold, could I tap you for more information about the climate smart strategies? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Sorry, having trouble with my Zoom window here. So yeah, I have to go back and look at the climate smart strategies list, but that is the guidance by which we would measure the, or I should say, look at the priority of investments, is looking back at that climate smart strategy that was regionally adopted, and looking at the types of investments that produce the most carbon reduction. That was the part of that study. And that's really the list of investments that are most effective, and really provision of transit is at the top of the list in terms of being most effective. And then it had a rating system of other types of investment, sort of in a descending order. So, and it is things such as, in addition to the transit, which was the type of investment, modal investment that would return the biggest bang for the buck on carbon reduction in the region. There were other things such as system management and operations investments, things like signal timing, those sorts of investments. Active transportation infrastructure, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure was another that's a little further down the list. So we can provide a copy of that to you if you need to want to look at that over before you're out advocating for what types of investment makes the most sense in Clackamas County.
Yeah, and just a reminder, and I know that some have not heard this, but and I don't have the link handy, but is it Google? Who was that? I think it was. There was a study done in Seattle area. They made an investment into greenhouse gas reduction based on signal timing, and I think that science that was revealed showed that stop and go traffic actually is a huge contributor to greenhouse gases, and I think that was what was not actually factored accurately, I don't think, in the RTP discussions and those priorities. So it's not necessarily about what, for Clackamas County, for example, it's not necessarily about what might be philosophically or physically the best greenhouse gas reduction, but what fits for Clackamas County that can improve and build on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. Let's keep moving this ahead, and we'll Jamie, when you're wrapped, we'll jump into Ted's information as well. We can kind of revisit some of this.
Fantastic. So final point is very brief. We asked the question whether or not a project must be named in the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, prior to seeking competitive grants from the Regional Flexible Fund allocation, which are federal dollars. And the process for amending projects into the RTP, if they are not there already, is very cumbersome. So Metro staff have determined that yes, projects must be on the RTP constrained list, meaning these are projects that have already gone through the regional process, being reviewed for inclusion in the plan, and they're projects that we can reasonably be expected to fund over the horizon of the regional transportation plan. So as we consider what projects in Clackamas County might be suitable for this next round of funding, and the grant is anticipated to open later this year for applications, this might be a good time for us to go back, refresh ourselves on what local projects are already on the list, and hold them up against any criteria and guidance that Metro is able to release over the coming months. Thank you.
Very good. Any final questions for Ms. Lorenzini on this topic? All right.
Well, I don't have any questions, but I want to just give a context to that first topic that came up, which was on the proportionality of funding. And I want to echo what Jamie said. That's been consistent from Metro, that there is no legal way to maneuver that you get this percent or y'all get that percent. But I would say historically and internally, y'all have set a local goal of trying to achieve roughly the county's population within the region. And so what you're targeting, or what you've always tried to target, is something around 20%, which is about the population of the Clackamas urban area within the metro area. That's not been something that you can say like we need to get our 20%, as Jamie was describing, but that's been sort of your did we do well, did we not do well sort of test for yourselves. And some years y'all are at 12 to 15%, and I think in one year y'all got like a 35–40%. So to Jamie's point, it ebbs and flows over the various cycles of this, but that's a good number to keep in mind. It's not a number that you can hang on to, but it's a good target to test your success through these funding cycles.
Very good. Jamie?
Thank you. Real quick, Trent, as you're talking, it brings up an important point that it's not necessarily getting to that 20%. It's also a question of how do we right size projects for this application process. For example, during this last cycle, Clackamas County had a very modest ask, and we submitted lower cost projects. Necessarily then, even if we did receive full funding for everything we asked for, it would still be a proportionally smaller percentage of the available funding. As I go back and research prior distributions of grant dollars, I will also go through and average what the average grant award was each cycle. And that might be a helpful tool as we start thinking through what size of projects might be beneficial to ask for if we have that option. Thank you.
Very good. Good comments. Okay. We'll put a pin in this one at this moment and jump into to Ted's presentation on the federal transportation redistribution funding to local projects. Ted, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So I'm here today just to give a briefing. Tomorrow at JPACT, I'll give a similar briefing, and with the idea that we have a proposal for some new federal funds that have been awarded to the region. And that we will then, after taking input from everybody, come back next month in June and ask for your approval of a final proposal. So at this point, what redistribution funds are federal funding that have come from other states, essentially, who have not spent all of their funding authority that's provided them by the Federal Transportation Administration and the Federal Highway Administration. And when other states don't obligate, it's called obligation of their funds, it's made available to states that have obligated all their funds. And the state of Oregon does a very good job through the Oregon Department of Transportation of making sure that the state does obligate all of its federal funds each year and becomes eligible then to receive these funds from other states that have not. So these funds become available again when other states don't obligate all their authority, and then ODOT, if they have obligated, or if we have collectively obligated all of our federal funds in the state, they can apply for these funds, this funding authority. They've done so successfully for many of the last eight years as the funds have become available. And in the recent times, in the recent last 2 years, we have had an agreement with ODOT that if we do our part in terms of contributing to obligating our local projects with federal funds on them on schedule, then ODOT will actually share a portion of those redistribution funds with us. And so that's the funding we're talking about. It will come to us in the form of what are called surface transportation block grants, which are the same types of funds that we get that we're distributing through the Regional Flexible Fund allocation process. We had forecasted a small amount of these funds being available for the last 2 years, assuming that we were going to perform well in terms of obligating our projects on schedule. But in the last 2 years, ODOT's done better than expected and provided more funding to us than what we had forecasted. And so what we need to do is, rather than wait and allocate these funds as part of the next allocation process, Regional Flexible Fund allocation process, we need, it really makes sense to go ahead and distribute them more quickly so that we can, again, get them obligated and get them onto projects now. So what we're talking about is about $13.6 million available. And we are proposing that we reinvest these funds into projects and activities that will continue to help us obligate our projects on time and remain eligible for these funds in the future. So in terms of how we operationalize that, what we're proposing is to take 10 million of the $13.6 million and to give it to existing regional flexible fund allocations from recent allocations from the recent past, who have really been facing significant inflationary impacts over the last 4 years. I'm sure you're all aware that projects have been facing much higher than usual inflationary impacts. And so I think actually one of our local jurisdictions in Washington County was saying in the last 4 years, they've faced 28% inflation rate over the last 3 or 4 years, which is really much higher than what an agency would have been predicting when they applied for these funds in the first place. What we would like to do is support those local projects that we've already allocated funds to. They already meet all of our policy objectives by being awarded these funds in previous rounds. Let them apply and tell us what the impacts have been to them and what their needs are, and then award enough funding from this $10 million to help them actually stay on schedule and be able to enter into those obligation contracts with ODOT and the Federal Highway Administration and keep those projects on schedule. So that's what we're proposing for the first $10 million. For $3 million, what we would like to do is support projects that will be awarded funds in this upcoming round of the Regional Flexible Fund allocation process, and really address a project delivery issue that local federal aid projects face that prevent them from moving more quickly into construction, which is that sort of first year after the funding award. It takes a long time for them to negotiate a contract with the Oregon Department of Transportation to actually begin to able to spend those monies on the project itself and be reimbursed for project costs. There's a lot of work that needs to take place before a local agency can sign that contract with the Oregon DOT. And we'd like to take advantage of, with this $3 million, award that proportionally to the projects that will be funded in this upcoming round, to be able to make some funding available to them during that 1 year to 18-month interim period when they're trying to do some of that project development work to get to a contract with ODOT. And so it'd be making some funding available for either consultant services or for local staff or for professional services provided by ODOT to help them do the work necessary to get to that contract. So that's the that's the $3 million pot. And then for the remaining $600,000, we'd like to utilize that for some process support activities for the Regional Flexible Fund allocation itself. One is we've been hearing loud and clear during this last project development, our project program direction for the RUFA process, that the application process for RUFA is somewhat difficult for smaller agencies in the region. So we would like to take some funding and make that available to small jurisdictions and provide them some consultant support in applying for the funds themselves. So this would just be a couple $100,000 made available for services for a smaller agency to put together a good application, a strong application for these funds, and sort of reduce that sort of staff capacity barrier. And actually, we hope improve the quality of the application we get from smaller agencies in terms of having good cost estimates and good description of the scope of the project that they want to build. Second element of this is we do a project risk assessment, or we like to do a project risk assessment of all the applications we get to understand some of those project delivery issues that these applications may face, so that we can understand them and address them during the application process. So a little bit of funding for that, and then a little bit of funding for project development, monitoring, and reporting tools. So we need to be doing a better job of tracking projects after they've been awarded funds, but before they're delivering, to make sure that they are staying on schedule and that we can adjust our programming schedule to make sure that we are programming a realistic schedule so that we don't trip up on not obligating these projects on time. So those last three parts are what would make up the remaining $600,000. So that's the proposal in terms of what we'd like to do with these funds. And we're interested in getting feedback this month, and then we'll come back for, as I said, in June for a decision on how to move forward.
Very good. Thank you for the information. We'll open the floor up for any questions or comments. Ted, actually, I do have a question. So, and I don't know, it's early in the process. We haven't identified projects for that $10 million influx of additional capital, but it's always a little frustrating to me. Just, it's like, ooh, $10 million seems like a really big number, but then within the scope of the actual projects, it's really pretty small. I mean, when we look at kind of the opportunity set here, how much will how many projects could that potentially move the needle on? Is it a significant number? What does that look like for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the needs of the projects that get identified, and that's what we hope to better understand if we open this process up and say, you come tell us which projects are really facing a barrier in terms of a funding shortfall. I think most of the regional flexible fund projects that we fund are on the scale of, $4 to $7 million projects. And so another $500,000 or $1 million is actually a somewhat significant contribution to, addressing some of those inflation impacts they've been facing. And I think maybe helping get them to the finish line.
Very good. Any other questions, comments? All right. I think you're off the hook. Thank you for the time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very good. Moving on. Mr. Wilson, you've got the regional transportation priorities queued up.
Thank you very much. This will be pretty short, I think, which is that in 2025, that the state legislature is moving toward a transportation package. And I think that still is, to be determined. The Joint Committee on Transportation is about to embark on a roadshow, and the first meeting of that roadshow is on June 4th. And then there will be a roadshow stop in Clackamas County, and it'll actually be in Happy Valley in late September. So there's work for us to do here at Clackamas County to prepare for that. And part of that work will be to really dial in at the C4 retreat to talk about what are your transportation priorities and how do you show up in those conversations. But parallel to that work is work that JPAC is doing and conversations that JPAC is having around what they're calling these regional transportation priorities. Right now they're in information mode. So if you've been attending the JPAC meetings or watching them, you've seen ODOT come and talk about their funding gaps and funding shortfall and challenges, which they've been very consistent on for, I think, over a year now. Last month, I believe AOC and LLC came to JPAC to talk about some of their funding challenges and opportunities. This month at JPAC, it will be Transportation for America coming to talk about certain funding modes and opportunities that they have. And I believe ODOT is also coming to share an update on their VMT program, the Vehicle Miles Travel program called Orgo. And so that will be this current milestone in this multi-meeting process that JPAC is moving through to provide information to JPAC members with the target of reaching your July JPAC meeting to start discussing a draft plan of what will those regional priorities be as y'all approach the 2025 transportation package. And so information gathering only right now for this conversation at JPAC, but I wanted to just provide a reminder about what those meetings are about and what you're sort of working toward, which is really this July conversation, to have a first conversation about what are your priorities. And there's plenty of time to talk about that. And I think that the June C4 retreat provides y'all a unique opportunity to dial in on how you want to show up to that meeting to bring the county's priorities into that regional conversation. Yes, Mayor Milch.
This reminds me a little bit of the Special Transportation Subcommittee that had hearings last year, and some of us traveled to Portland and other regions. Should we be preparing testimony input for that? What do they want to hear from the public, particularly at that first meeting on June 4th in the Portland area? Or should we as a region kind of wait until our turn in September, or follow along the way and hear, from other, broader regional partners as to what the direction is?
I think the answer to all those questions is yes, to a degree, right? I would recommend showing up to monitor, and that's what I'm going to do this June 4 meeting. It is very specifically going to be about Portland, downtown metro area. It'll be, I believe, heavy with IBR and Rose Quarter and Portland's O&M needs. I think TriMet will show up and talk about transit opportunities within there. So that's what I'm hearing will be the focus of that discussion, and rightfully so, based on the geography of that meeting. Similar to those visits back in the winter, Mayor, we have a Clackamas specific visit that is scheduled. So I think that it behooves us to go and watch what happens at the Portland meeting on June 4, go to the retreat 2 weeks later, dial in what are your priorities, and then start to show up at the other regional meetings as appropriate. So that's my recommendation right now. And I think the reason that I like that approach is when we showed up to those special subcommittee on transportation meetings, we had 2 years of maybe more of data for tolling and what the effects would be. We knew how to show up to those meetings. And this is really, it's a similar conversation, but it's also different, because essentially we're talking about what are the state's priorities, what is supportable at the state legislative level to go and advance a transportation package. So very different from why is tolling giving us heartburn? What are the data points? What is strong? And I will say to a degree, and I just want to make sure that I'm consistently reminding this group, and I've been pretty clear about it so far, because tolling is on a pause, and because the I-205 project still has, the Abernathy Bridge in particular, still has a funding gap that needs to be addressed, there are legislators who are ready for y'all to answer this lingering question of, if not tolling, then what? And I know that some legislators, including the leadership, Speaker Fahey, President Wagner, are wanting to know, like, do you have other ideas? And you don't need to have that answer right now, but I think that they are looking for some continuity across the state, that there is an appetite for either more or additional or changes to how transportation is funded here in this upcoming session. And if the result of these tours is that there's not an appetite, there very likely will not be a transportation funding package in 2025. And so I think that is sort of what's at stake. And for this group in particular, that potentially has implications to how Abernathy Bridge is funding, which, remember, tolling is still potentially on the table based on the governor's letter. So I want to put those, sticky notes on the wall for us. That's what we're going to talk about at the retreat, because there might not be anything that this group is supporting, but there may be something, and we don't need to have an answer right now, and we don't even need to have an answer in June, but we need to start working towards where there is consensus in that. And I think the retreat will provide an opportunity to go and have that conversation. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, just a few minutes, and so that I'm done here, I'm gonna head off to my my commitment. For those of you who were part of the JPAC trip to DC last week, know what I'm talking about, but there's a little bit of a, got some feedback, but there's a buzz going around. And I think we kind of discovered from conversations that the Highway Trust Fund or the state highway funding distribution, the 50-30-20, has been in jeopardy for years as gas mileage has been increasing. That's been dagger number one, if you want to call it that. And the number two has been the fact that electric vehicles are not paying their fair share. And so that's another one. And the third one, which has been really induced by our need to address this climate issue, both on the federal side and on the state side, is the automakers being instructed that you're no longer going to be able to sell fossil fuel powered cars by certain dates, depending on what state you're in and so forth. So that will destroy really the highway trust fund and our ability to have that bucket of money is going to shrink tremendously. So it has been accelerated by, again, that action. So therefore, I think it's incumbent upon both on the federal side and on the state legislature side. I'm going to say legislature, not legislators, because a lot of them are new when 2017 passed, HB 2017, and other regulations that have been induced by or put forward by the governor. But I personally am inclined right now to attend the first one in Portland, just to broach that point and to make that point and make sure I do that both at the AOC level and also inspire others like yourselves who are elected city members who are a member of the LOC to get that conversation going and address that. I think that ought to be the theme, and I think that we need something in 2025, whether it's some kind of an increase that augments the funding, the highway trust fund, or all of it, all combined. So that's beginning my message. And then by the time August rolls around, September rolls around, I think we'll have more of a refined approach to how we address that group when they attend Happy Valley or the Clackamas County one, if that helps, Mayor. And with
Very
that,
good.
I wish you all well.
Hasta la vista. Mr. Wilson, anything else?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. Just, start to get in that constructive mode and start to brainstorm, like what are those other opportunities? And specifically for the JPAC conversation, driving towards, there are general needs that everybody needs across the state. Is there an opportunity at JPAC to say, yeah, but the region is bigger and probably has more needs? Is there a level up? And I think that's kind of what this conversation is driving towards. Will it just be, we want to make sure that the message is consistent across the state? Or is it going to be that plus you have all of our support to do a little bit extra here, whatever that's going to be? And maybe the answer is no, but I think that's where that conversation is going. Everyone together, including the region, or everyone together and the region agrees with that. And we also know that we have, big infrastructure needs that are, right in our face. So it's a hard conversation, and that's a political one, and that's what you're moving towards, and that's what that information is going to hopefully provide for you as you get closer to it.
Very good. Good comments. It's the classic situation of limited resources and near unlimited needs across the region. So we will do our best to navigate that in the future. All right. With that, shall we? Do you want to bring Jamie Stasny over as well, and we'll transition into TPAC, and the Jamies will have the floor for that one.
Yeah, Team Jamie for the win.
Yay.
Before we jump into the TPAC update, I want to circle back to a question that was raised in the first agenda topic. Apologies, Ted. My brain turned off and I thought we were talking about bond options as part of your agenda topic. Councillor Sherman, circling back to your question about potential bond repayments. For the 2028 to 2030 timeframe, the region's scheduled bond repayments are a little under 52 million, which is a decrease over the current cycle, where repayments are a little over 65 million. The net difference is 13.5 million in newly unencumbered funds. Metro staff modeled some potential bond options. If we bonded $10 million, we could expect proceeds in the realm of 55 million. If we bonded 10.6 million, then we could expect somewhere in the realm of 105 million in bond proceeds.
Very good. And if I remember the prior conversations correctly, the idea is accelerating the opportunity to utilize those dollars versus just having more available resources on a year-over-year basis going forward. And the fear being, of course, inflation eats into the future cost of some of these projects if we are waiting for significant periods of time. However, I will say that anecdotally, the latest transportation bid projects in the city of Happy Valley are coming in below expectations. Asphalt costs are down 30% from prior bids. Labor costs are lower. So I'm going to cross my fingers. Maybe we're seeing the beginnings of a trend. Doubtful, but maybe. Okay, getting into our TPAC update. Jamie, is the other Jamie here to come over?
So Karen is our TPAC member.
sorry.
And Karen's out this week, so it's just
Gotcha.
Jamie Lorenzini for this particular update.
Perfect.
Okay, could we still bring Jamie Stasny over? She is our Clackamas County TPAC alternate.
I will try again. But no problem.
Ah, okay. That's okay. Let's talk a little bit more about REFA and MTIP. By way of background, the Regional Flexible Fund we've been talking about is one tool we use to allocate federal transportation funds to projects and programs throughout the region. Related but different, the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is a 4-year near-term transportation capital improvement program for the region. Beginning this conversation off, I want to touch on some elements and updates relating to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, MTIP. As part of their meeting, TPAC recommended an MTIP amendment for the purpose of adding 2 new ODOT managed projects during the 2024 to 2027 timeframe. This is a little interesting because as part of the project package, ODOT proposes to design, construct, and implement a bus-on-shoulder dedicated transit lane along the I-205 corridor from Stafford Road to Sunnybrook Road, which is really awesome news. And TriMet, I see you. These improvements, however, are limited to infrastructure and do not include service operations. As memory serves, I think SMART was looking at a pilot in the future for bus on shoulder, and this could potentially be a candidate corridor. Dwight, can you nod if I'm remembering that correctly? Yeah. So good news in the realm of providing additional transit infrastructure, potentially maybe future service. Additionally, and also in the realm of the MTIP, TPAC recommended to JPAC a draft policy direction for the next MTIP cycle. The purpose of the 2027 to 2030 MTIP program direction is to incorporate and operationalize RTP, Regional Transportation Plan, policy objectives and investment priorities in the early stage of the next MTIP cycle. The MTIP policy direction will accomplish a few different objectives, and it's pretty non-controversial. It'll advance our 2023 RTP goals. It's going to implement something called the Strategic Regional Funding Approach, which is a document that loosely outlines a variety of different tools that could be applied to different project types, such as STIF funding for transit capital improvements or street utility fees for a road maintenance project. The MTIP policy direction will also foster regional funding coordination and, importantly, ensure federal compliance. And then finally, I'll skip over to the REFA side of the equation, which is, again, the tool we use to allocate federal transportation dollars. Previously, this body has had some conversations about policy options that are on the table as it relates to step 2, the portion of the allocation that relates to local competitive grants. Previously, there was an option on the table to increase the minimum funding request for project development from $500,000 to $1 million. Metro staff have been leaning into the conversation and have done an excellent job. They came back with a new proposal to increase the minimum request threshold from $500,000 to $800,000, which is a decrease from the minimum or the previous proposal. Additionally, they've been leaning into how to provide technical assistance to small jurisdictions. One way that could happen is by instituting a pre-application in response to a notice of intent to apply prior to the formal opening of the step 2 application window. And this pre-application notice of intent could be used to identify which jurisdictions are applying and help identify support activities to undertake during the application window. So that seems like a pretty elegant way of determining not just which jurisdictions may need a little help applying, but also what type of help they need to be effective, because it may look different for every jurisdiction. So thank you, Metro staff, for being incredibly creative with how you scale and provide services to meet everybody's need. Are there any questions?
Mr. Brashear.
All right, thank you. Just to clarify Jamie's point, the I-205 bus on shoulder project, SMART is the kind of the driving force behind that. The buses that will be used on that service have been purchased. They should be delivered in this summer. And depending on the timing for preparing the shoulder, I'm estimating at this point we could get that service up and running as early as probably November timeframe of this year. And the funding has already for that service has already been identified. So it's not there's no funding issue with that particular service. So we're ready to go and looking forward to getting that service up and running. So just to clarify.
Very good. Thank you for that information. Looking forward to that. And I heard they are going to wrap the buses with your image on the side. We appreciate that.
Well, people will throw eggs at it, I'm sure. So at least
very good. Any other comments for Jamie before we transition over to MPAC? All right, Jamie and Jamie, thank you for both being here. Next up is our Aaron Key and Ted Reed from Metro will provide us an urban growth report housing data update. I see you're bringing them over. Wonderful.
Yep, they'll be here momentarily. There's Ted.
Aaron had a last minute conflict, so you've got me today. You get 2 Teds for Metro, 2 Jamies, 2 Teds.
Who could ask for anything more, Ted? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ted Reed from Metro's Planning, Development, and Research Department. I'm the project manager for the region's urban growth management decisions. And we wanted to give you, or I wanted to give you a bit of an update on all of the things that we've been doing over the last year or so. Many of you have heard parts of this at MPAC or other groups, our Urban Growth Report Roundtable, for instance. So some of this may be old news to some of you, and for others it'll be new. So let me start my slideshow. Unless, Trent, do you typically run the slides? Or?
All yours.
Okay, let me share.
But I can help if you need me to.
Well, if you have it available, I would actually prefer that. But, okay, I'll do it. Okay. Are people able to see my screen? And is it, let's see, make sure it's is it the presenter view or the?
Then the one that's black where you can kind of see like the next slide. There you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So just a quick orientation of why we do this work, other than it being state law, the sort of reasons that we do this growth management work are that we want to have an intentional approach to how the region grows. The law is set up so that urban growth boundary expansions are intended to happen over time. This is not about preventing outward growth. It's about doing it in a thoughtful, deliberate way so that we protect farms and forests, make the most of infrastructure investments that we've been making in our existing communities, things like that. So that's the sort of the big picture reason why we do this work. And right now, our Metro Council is headed towards a decision by the end of this calendar year. This is the 6-year cycle that's laid out in state statute. They made their last decision at the end of 2018, so this is 6 years later. Over the last year plus, we've been doing a lot of the technical work and bringing that forward to various groups to assess the regional need for an expansion. So today I'm going to be running through some of those aspects of that work that we've been doing. The other part of this work is that we've learned over the years that we really, aside from doing the technical work, we also need to have a local partner that's been doing the planning for an urban reserve area in order to ensure that any urban reserves that get added to the urban growth boundary actually result in development of housing or businesses. We've learned that without that city readiness, areas tend to take a very long time to develop or don't develop at all. So you need that city governance, county support, helping to pay for needed infrastructure. This time around, when we solicited proposals from cities, we got one such proposal from the city of Sherwood for the Sherwood West Urban Reserve area. They are actually presenting their concept plan for Sherwood West this evening at Impact. So for those of you that will attend that, you'll hear more about that tonight. We are, you see on the slide, the you are here, we are wrapping up our regional analysis of need now. So we're going to be releasing a draft urban growth report. That's the UGR that is mentioned here in some subsequent slides. That really kicks off the public process where people get to begin talking about policy options. So far it's been very much around technical analysis, and we're about to enter this decision-making phase. A little bit about the decision-making structure. As I mentioned, the Metro Council is charged with making regional urban growth boundary decisions. They receive advice directly from the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, IMPACT, as well as our Committee on Racial Equity, CORE. And IMPACT has the benefit of receiving advice from their Technical Advisory Committee, IMTAC. And to give a little bit of form to this decision-making process, our Metro Chief Operating Officer will be issuing her own recommendation in August, based on all of the analysis, based on public comments that we've received. She's going to be making a recommendation that will then be advanced to IMPACT for IMPACT's consideration. As our COO, Marisa Madrigal, is making this recommendation, she is thinking about what she's been hearing from groups like our Urban Growth Report Roundtable that we convened this time, as well as a new youth cohort to try to both develop new leadership in public policy and growth management, but also to incorporate more youth perspective in this work. And lastly, we have a group called the Land Use Technical Advisory Group that's been meeting roughly monthly for almost a year now. This is a lot of city and county planners from around the region, as well as some private sector folks that are advising us, particularly on how we count how much room for growth there is inside their current urban growth boundary. Aside from, so I mentioned a number of the formal advisory groups we've been to. We've been making the rounds with a lot of other private groups. Yesterday, my colleague Aaron was at the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, for instance. We were at the Washington County Coordinating Committee on Monday. So making rounds, talking to as many groups as want to hear from us about this process, about all of the work we've been doing. And just to set some expectations for what the Urban Growth Report is, we're going to be releasing this in draft form in late June, the very end of June. This is a decision support tool. It doesn't tell anyone what the correct answer is for whether there's a need to expand the urban growth boundary. It gives information to support that decision making. So I'll talk a little bit in subsequent slides how it does that. Because we know when we're looking out 20 years into the future, we don't want to imply so much precision in our technical work. We need to allow that space for policymakers to make informed decisions. And so this urban growth report, a big part of what it does, guided by state law, is to look at whether there's a regional need to add land to the urban growth boundary. We do that by some fundamental analyses. The first one is on the demand side. We do a regional forecast for population growth, household growth, employment growth. We use that to determine how much land is in demand over the next 20 years. We also look at supply or capacity. How much room is there inside the current urban growth boundary to accommodate that expected housing growth or job growth? And that tells us whether there's a need to expand the urban growth boundary. And again, if there is a need, our council policy is to look to cities who are making proposals for these urban growth boundary expansions into urban reserves. So starting out on the demand side, we conduct this regional demographic employment forecast. It is at the 7-county metropolitan statistical area geography. So that's the sort of light blue geography you see depicted here. This is defined by the federal government. It's where we have some of our best historic data, as well as forecast data from our macroeconomic forecast source, Standard & Poor's Global Insight. You'll note that the 7-county area includes counties to the north of the river in Washington State, as well as some counties in Oregon that are outside of Metro's jurisdiction. Ultimately, Metro Council, with advice from Impact, needs to decide how much of that 7-county growth is coming to our Metro urban growth boundary that's shown in red here. So to do that, we start out with this forecast. We convened an expert panel with demographers and economists from places like Portland State University's Population Research Center, the Oregon Employment Department, folks like that, to advise us on this forecast. And big picture, the thing that kept coming up over and over is that birth rates are declining. This is a trend that is happening in many countries around the world. It's happening in the United States. It's happening in Oregon, and our region is no exception. People are choosing to have fewer children. And so this has implications for how much population growth we expect in the future. You see the trend going back to 1960 here. And basically since around 2005, it's been on a decline. Our expert panel expects that expects a little bit of a bump back up post pandemic, but longer term they expect a bit of a decline. What this means is that by the year roughly 2032 or so, in about a decade, we will not have population growth coming from natural change. So natural change is births minus deaths. So without growth coming from natural change, we rely on net migration to the region. This shows the historic trend going back to 1960 for net migration into our metropolitan statistical area. That's the MSA. It averages about 15,000 more people per year coming to our MSA. But you see there's a lot of noise year to year. It goes up and down quite a bit. We're familiar with what's happened in recent years during the pandemic. But this kind of gains and losses has happened before. Again, on average, about 15,000 people per year adding to our population. There's some uncertainty around this going forward. This is something that our expert panel wanted us to emphasize, is that we're assuming this historic average going forward. That will be the source of population growth for the region. But there is uncertainty around it. In particular, our expert panel noted that the whole West Coast has affordability challenges, and our region is, of course, no exception to that. And given that, the relative affordability of other places in the country may be something that draws migration to other locations around the country. Our expert panel talked a bit about climate-induced migration as well, and so far they've said there's there's just no data to show that there's a trend. You can see that here with all the historic ups and downs in population migration. You don't see a trend of this increasing necessarily. They did say that intuitively it makes sense the Pacific Northwest will be an area that attracts migrants in the future because of our temperate climate. We're just not seeing it yet. So I mentioned a number of reasons why there's uncertainty looking out over the next 20 years. So we deal with that uncertainty in a few ways. One is convening the expert panel I've been mentioning. We want to make sure that we're talking to other experts, demographers and economists as we're doing this work. The other way we handle this is by producing what we call a range forecast. So you see the historic trend in dark blue there, and then our baseline forecast is that middle line, the dark blue that continues out, adding about 300,000 more people to the metropolitan statistical area over the next 20 years. Baseline forecast is the most likely outcome. We also show the high and low here. They are possible, though not as likely as the baseline forecast. On the employment side, same thing. We conduct a range. There's perhaps even more uncertainty here around employment growth because if there's one thing that we've learned in recent years is that we're part of a global economy, and events all around the world can have impacts on our region's economy. So baseline forecast, we expect about 110,000 more jobs in the MSA over the next 20 years. Again, high and low parts of this range, less likely than the baseline. I've covered the demand side, the regional forecast a bit. The other part of this is how much room is there in the existing urban growth boundary for that growth that I was just mentioning. So we conduct a capacity analysis. Today I'm going to talk about the residential side of it. We're wrapping up our work on the employment land side. Three sources of growth capacity that we work with. The first is fairly self-explanatory, vacant and partially vacant land. So land that has little or no building improvement on it, no parking lots. That's the first category. Second category is lands that may be used for redevelopment and infill over the next 20 years. This is really a forecast, this part of it, rather than being an inventory of lands. And we've heard over the years that we should try to have more analysis of market feasibility in this aspect of the work, because it is a forecast about what the market might do with properties that already have the building on them. So which properties that have buildings are going to see the market respond, where they tear down the building and build something new with more housing units. We've contracted with Johnson Economics this time around to help us with that work. Jerry Johnson has developed what's called a pro forma model that essentially looks at every tax lot, all 550,000 of them in the urban growth boundary that have development on them, and determines whether it makes financial sense to redevelop the property. And if so, what would likely go on that property after redevelopment. Third category is land in concept planned areas without urban level zoning. So these are areas that have been added to the urban growth boundary from 2018 onward that don't yet have urban zoning. So think of the River Terrace 2.0 area outside of Tigard that was added to the boundary in 2021. Places like that. So we've used those assumptions from concept plans that cities have done. Before I leave the slide, I should note there's some things we don't count. So the eastern portion of the former city of Damascus, you all are familiar with the challenges with governance and infrastructure provision out there. We've counted buildable land, but we are not counting on any growth capacity in that eastern portion. We've worked with the city of Happy Valley to figure out where that demarcation is, where Happy Valley is likely to annex into the future. So we're counting the western portion as growth capacity, with the understanding that Happy Valley will provide that governance eventually, but again, not the eastern portion. This is what it all amounts to. When I was talking about redevelopment and the pro forma model that Johnson Economics developed for us, he ran a number of different scenarios for us, basically testing what might happen under current market conditions versus if market conditions got worse or got better, because really this is about how the market responds. That helps us come up with this range of potential capacity, because some of this is beyond public sector control. It's really about market response. And we want to be clear about the uncertainty here. So it gives us a range of 145,000 roughly to 195,000 housing units of capacity inside the current urban growth boundary. You see those three sources of capacity that I mentioned here: the vacant land, redevelopment, and new urban areas. Vacant land, again, we see a range there because of potential market response. What it might build in particular is middle housing, townhouses, duplexes. Is that going to be something that we see more of versus single family housing? Okay, so jumping back to the demand side, we've talked about the regional forecast. We've talked about capacity in the urban growth boundary. Now we need to take that regional forecast and figure out what it means for our region's housing needs. The state law has changed in recent years. It used to be that we would look only at the future, the next 20 years of housing needs. We do that still, and state law has now added this second aspect where we look at existing housing needs. This is part of all of the housing legislation that's been happening over recent years. Existing housing needs are understood to be housing for people experiencing houselessness, as well as historic underproduction. So many of you are familiar with the story of what has happened post-Great Recession. Population growth continued, housing production did not. So we have this backlog of housing that's created the housing crisis. So we're now counting that in our analysis as well as future need. So how do we do this? How do we move from a household forecast, the number of people first that we expect to come into the region? How do we move from that to demand for land? There are a few steps that we take. The first is, I mentioned we have a household forecast. We have a lot of detail in there about household incomes, ages, household sizes, whether they have kids. And we have some support from Echo Northwest in doing this work, figuring out how that translates into demand for different types of housing in different budget categories. So when we're thinking about how those household characteristics may translate into different housing demand, one thing that we see in our household forecast is that the net growth is in older households. So think about the age household characteristic category you're in today and add 20 years. And that's what we're looking at here. And so this is the net change. This isn't the total of households. So this doesn't mean that we're going to be having no adults with age 25 to 44 without kids. It simply means that the growth is in other categories. So a lot of growth in retirement age households. So that's going to have some implications for the types of housing that are needed. And related to that, that having more retirees, it means that we're going to have more households on fixed income. So you see the income distribution here of the net change in households. A lot of it is in these lower income groups, again, primarily because of people being on fixed incomes in retirement. Some of these households will have some accumulated wealth, others will not. Our consultant team helped us think through this with 3 different scenarios. The first one is following in footsteps. So it assumes that 20 years from now, someone who is my age is going to make very similar housing decisions to the decisions that I made. The fundamental shift scenario says, well, people are going to make different choices, both based on preference, but also just on necessity. We have an affordability challenge. People have accumulated more student debt, so these things are going to play out in the housing market. People are going to be making different housing choices in the future. The middle scenario here is new normal, that we're going to see a balance of these. Some people are going to make choices similar to their predecessors. Others will make some fundamental shifts out of preference or necessity. And we do this work also using that range forecast I mentioned earlier. So that's how we end up with this range of need, the low to high growth scenarios. The other thing I should note here is that we've moved from that MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area geography, to the urban growth boundary. And the way we do that is we've assumed that as with our history, we're going to capture, is the word we use, about 70% of the 7 counties' household growth. That's the historic rate dating back to, I believe, 1979 for our urban growth boundary. So where that leads us is baseline a need for about 180,000 additional housing units. You see the breakout there for future needs versus existing needs. Existing needs is the same across these scenarios because it's just a static number of the number of units needed to house people experiencing houselessness, as well as that backlog of housing. So here's the range. I think we might be approaching the end of my slides so that you all can ask questions. I'll stop sharing.
Very good. Thank you for the information. I'll just ask a quick one, and then Mayor Milch, I see your hand is up. We'll come to you next. So the based on the information just provided, we have a baseline housing need for 180,000 units or so as we look forward over the course of the next 20 years. And I think the capacity number was 145 to 185, somewhere in that ballpark. So if you split the difference and call it 165, our capacity is shy of our need as we look out 20 years. Is that a reasonable takeaway? And knowing that there is a variability in both those numbers.
Thank you, Chair. That's essentially the type of discussion that policymakers are going to be having with this information this summer. Again, we as staff don't want to imply more precision than we should in this work, so we're trying to provide the best analysis we can, best data we can, but also at some point get out of the way of the policy discussion. So there'll be a bit more detail about different types of housing that are needed in the urban growth report. But yes, you've laid out the discussion that we anticipated.
The basics for the future conversation.
Yep.
Very good. Mary Milch, please.
One comment, I think you are underestimating the significance of climate migration. I consider myself a climate migrant. When we came here looking for affordability, we could have moved to Texas, apologies to Trent, but we came to Oregon. And, and I think climate is a big reason for that. So keep that, recognize that significant. Second thing, in the midst of all this process, Governor Kotek made some pretty ambitious housing goals for the construction of new housing units. And I didn't see reference to that, whether it changed the process or some of the assumptions that you were making. We've had no indication from her how she expects to distribute that around the state, whether we're going to see, new urbanization of counties that are outside the 5 Oregon counties that are a part of this regional analysis. But what impact do the governor's goals have on the process that you've been going through?
Thank you, Mayor. So the governor set a goal for the entire state. I believe it was about 36,000 additional homes per year. The state is in the process of updating some of that analysis. Thankfully, The state is using the same consultant team that we are using in our work. So I'd say there's a lot of coordination here in terms of the analysis of existing need and future need. I think, while we haven't explicitly said, here's the governor's goal, here's the part that we're taking, I think effectively the analyses are pretty well aligned.
Very good. Good comments. Councillor Pratt.
Looking at the future demographics is quite, 65 plus for a good part of the future population. And as you look at the housing needs, I'm just wondering if you're considering that, the older people, like, as we densify, we tend to build a lot of housing units with stairs. And if you're looking at the specific needs of that elderly population and the type of housing that works for them as you're looking through this.
Councillor, it's an excellent point. It's one that I think many of us have been thinking about as we do this work. Metro's role here is around regional land supply, but I think there's clearly subsequent work that has to be done about how that land gets used, what types of housing get built. A lot of that work gets done at the local level about addressing more specific needs, and certainly accessibility and visitability are going to be big ones going forward.
Very good. Councillor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I think there's an inherent tension between this process, which is charting out kind of what best knowledge says will happen, what the forecasters using their best tools say will happen, and then all of our desire right now to make policy change and major investments so that things actually happen more rapidly. So to Mayor Milch's point around the governor's goals, I do think we want to aspire to not only meet, but beat, but our current track record doesn't show that. So that's the tension point, and how much of that are you going to count towards this far out forecast? That said, I can't let this opportunity go by without saying that the governor's production goal does assume that the metro region will continue to do investments in deeply affordable housing like our metro housing bond, even though every single one of those dollars is already allocated towards the projects, and those pipeline dollars are essentially dried up. So we have a lot of policy questions around how not only are we going to meet the production goal, but how we're going to continue the affordability that needs to be baked into every housing plan.
Very good. Good comments. I know that, locally as well, we are seeing significant building, but the hindrance is labor. That's been kind of number one across the board. Materials are there, that they're expensive, but the materials are there, the land is there, the permitting process is there, the engineering is there. It's construction labor that's holding this up. And so I'm not sure how we address that. Okay, any other comments or questions for Ted today? All right. Thank you very much for the time. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Very good. And let's see. Finally on the agenda, looks like a quick MPAC update. And looking around the room, I guess that's me. So coming up, at our next MPAC meeting, we are going to get some of the results of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, that kind of target setting methodology, and ties right into this exact same conversation. I think one of the things that at least what we've seen historically is that the need right now is for smaller, more affordable housing, but kind of the future growth need is for larger. If we're relying on net migration into the region, we are going to have a need for larger homes, for higher level homes as well. And so I think that'll be interesting to kind of see how we reconcile that moving forward. In addition, we'll be covering the site readiness toolkit moving forward, so we'll get an update on that. And then also Sherwood's going to be providing us with their proposal for the UGB expansion on their west side. So that should be, is that the Chicken Creek area, I think is the area of Sherwood where that's expanding. No one can tell me why it's called Chicken Creek, but I think that's just me and how I get off on tangents, and so I apologize to the group for that. So other than that, that's all I've got as an MPAC update. Mr. Wilson, anything to add before we call this meeting today?
No, just invite your friends to the C4 retreat. We are going to, we'll say formally close the registration here on Friday is the last day. There is always an opportunity to apply or register after that. We can't guarantee the room after that, and that's why we've chosen that date. But so if there is someone on your council, remember that it's not just the C4 membership, it is also anyone who sits on your board or within your staff. Anyone's welcome, relevant to the conversation, so bring your friends. Again, Friday is when we have rooms locked until, and so after that, that's just where I struggle to guarantee a room if you're staying overnight. But please do register. We are doing really good on registration, but we could do better. And I like to always do better for our retreats. And that's always my goal, to make sure that y'all have good agenda and good attendance. So go and do good things. That's all we have from Clackamas County at this time.
Very good. Any other comments before we turn you loose today? I look forward to seeing many of you at the retreat coming up. It's always enjoyable to hang out in person. And so that'll be wonderful. All right, very good. Make it a great day. We'll see you again soon.